You're listening to the Colts Blue Zone Podcast with Mike Chappell and Dave Griffiths.
All right, welcome to this edition of the Colts Blue Zone Podcast. Matt Adams here alongside Mike Chappell. Dave Griffiths on the injured list this week, so it'll just be Mike and me, and we've got a lot of stuff to talk about this week. Playoffs starting Saturday. Colts will not be part of that, unfortunately, but we did hear from Anthony Richardson on Thursday, as well as Colts GM Chris Ballard. So, Chap, we've got plenty of stuff to talk about, but we'll start out with some of the coaching changes around the NFL here. Bill Belichick out in New England, they announced this morning he'll be replaced with Gerard Mayo.
Yeah, it's funny. Somebody talked about how with the Patriots, like 3 or 4 of these guys have Patriots ties. Of course, Belichick, Pete Carroll, Mike Vrabel, and there's another one. So you always wonder about that Patriot coaching tree. Well, Josh McDaniels, who crashed and burned Raiders again. But no, it's really amazing. And boy, that news cycle we had, meaning we and the media had, was it 24 hours or less with Belichick and Carroll and Vrabel and, oh, by the way, Nick Saban.
Nick Saban, legendary college football coach.
You're talking, 1,000 wins and on the Mount Rushmore of coaches at any level. Belichick, in all these guys, it's really amazing. And it's kind of curious how quickly the Patriots took care of their situation by having a plan in place. This is what the Colts did with Jim Caldwell when Tony left, is they had it planned out that now I can't remember if it was written in the contract, but they had a succession plan in place with Jim Caldwell, and that's why anyone wondering why they're not going through the coaching search and the Rooney Rule and all that stuff, it's because it was written in the contract ahead of the season and the league knew about it.
And that's just a weird thing because he's been there for, 24 seasons?
He's 37. Oh, you're talking Belichick. I'm talking about Mayo. But Mayo's been there. He's former Patriot, but he's 37 years old. All of a sudden, he's the youngest coach replacing an icon. I tell you, I always wanted to be the guy who replaced the guy who replaced the icon, because replacing
it's such a hard
Saban and Belichick, it's going to be tough.
Such a hard act to follow, and so it'll be weird when you watch football next year and you tune to a Patriots game and you won't have Belichick in his hoodie and his cutoff sleeves there.
But he'll be somewhere.
He'll be somewhere.
He's made it very clear that he wants to coach, and I'm guessing it's what is it? He's 15 wins away from Shula,
the Shula record.
Which, if that's what drives you, fine. So I can't imagine him going somewhere in the next 2 or 3 years winning a championship. But everybody's motivated, and good for him. If he wants to coach.
And there are plenty of places for him to land, because Pete Carroll out in Seattle, which was kind of surprising. It sounds like he wasn't exactly thrilled about being out there. He wanted to stay there and stay with his coaching staff.
Now he's an advisor?
An advisory role.
I don't think so.
How does that work? The one that really caught me off guard, Mike Vrabel out in Tennessee. He is a heck of a coach. He was close to maybe being the Colts' coach a few years ago when they were on their search. And he's out. He's a really, really good coach. He's not going to last very long out there. Ron Rivera out in Washington. Arthur Smith out in Atlanta. Not really a big surprise out there. And then we have our three teams that let go of their coaches during the season. You have the Chargers, the Raiders, and the Panthers. So all landing spots. If Belichick wants to coach somewhere, there are still some places for him. And I don't think Vrabel's going to be out there as a free agent coach for too much longer.
Talking to some people about Vrabel, and it just took me by surprise. And it appears that internally there was something going on, ownership and Vrabel.
That's the only explanation for it.
And somebody mentioned that sources and all this stuff, since we're on a podcast, who cares? But that when he was inducted into the Patriots Hall of Fame a couple months ago, whatever it was, and he talked and he said, and I'm paraphrasing, you guys, this fan base really needs to appreciate the ownership here. That's not the way it is everywhere. Well, I mean, what do you read that as a slap at Tennessee ownership? Because how many other places has he been? So I don't know. He's a quality coach, and again, I wouldn't have been surprised if he had been the Colts coach, because he was one they really coveted. So all of a sudden, the AFC South has got a lot of stuff going on. So, but it's kind of, including Jacksonville's face plant, which was amazing to watch from afar. They didn't, Peterson fires half of his coaching staff or whatever. So a lot of stuff going on.
It's still unbelievable. If you would look back a month ago at Jacksonville, even, they were going to win the division. There was no question about it. They were in the hunt even for that top seed in the conference, and then, then they had to win a game to get into the playoffs, and it couldn't even do that against a Tennessee team that was really not that good of a Tennessee team, but it is a well-coached team that, any given Sunday anybody can beat. And you knew that the Jacksonville Jaguars were just going to go in and limp there and kind of tank it, and they did.
We're going to find out, I think, in the next few months or weeks, whatever, that Trevor Lawrence was more injured than what. We knew he was banged up with things, but I think we're going to find out that was more than that. I thought this all started against the Colts. Was it the 37-20 game?
Yep.
And with no reason, they rolled him out, and I can't remember who it was, whether it was E.J. Speed or somebody, trips him up, and he comes out with a knee injury. So, yeah, I think we're going to find out that the quarterback was more – he wasn't dinged up, he was hurt, and that's why – and that led a lot to their tailspin.
And, of course, as we mentioned at the top of the show, the Colts not in the playoffs, but we'll go through the matchups real quick here. You have the Browns at Texans. That's on Saturday. That could have been the Colts very well right there hosting that game if they could have won last week. You've got Dolphins at Chiefs on Saturday as well. This one has rankled a lot of feathers because Peacock and NBC Universal paid $110 million apparently to hold this game.
Yeah, I'm doing the monthly Peacock because my AT&T with NBC, although that wouldn't have mattered in this case. I'm a little irritated that the NFL's greed reaches this level. Regular season, fine, but when it gets to the playoffs, I hate to see them limit how many of the massive fan base can get this, but it's greed. That's what the NFL is all about.
And the local TV markets, they will be on their local stations, so they'll be able to watch them. But if you're a Chiefs fan who lives in another state somewhere, then you're going to have to pay at least $5.99.
It's $5.99, and you can cancel anytime.
Now, I have an antenna at home. We don't have any cable, so we do a lot of streaming stuff. And we do keep Peacock on mostly because, for whatever reason, there's a place where we have one of those little antennas, and THR does not come in. Every other station in the market does.
I've had the same issue.
And so in order to watch Sunday Night Football, which I like to watch, I watch Notre Dame football as well. NBC's the place for that. Big Ten's doing basketball on Peacock now. Like IU and Purdue were both on Peacock last week. So, there is a reason to have that. But I don't know that the outlay that they're making is leading to the subscribers and the advertisers and the viewership that makes up for a $110 million payment to the NFL. But
they picked the one game that's probably the most intriguing.
Yes, yeah. You got that Dolphins team against the Chiefs.
And it's going to be 50 below zero.
Yeah, and super cold conditions. Ugh. So rest of the playoff schedule on Sunday, you've got 3 games. You've got Steelers at Bills, Packers at Cowboys, Rams at Lions, and then oddly again, the NFL Monday Night Football with a playoff game, Eagles at Bucks.
Who cares about shorter weeks? They just don't care.
They don't, do they? Not in the postseason, you think they would, but I guess they don't. But that's the 6 games for the playoffs. Would also like to mention coming out this week, Jim Irsay, recovering from respiratory illness. He's usually accessible, usually out in public. We see him a lot. Seems like we haven't seen him in a little bit, so he's been sick. The team's saying that severe respiratory illness, receiving some excellent care. Have you heard anything else about that chap?
Chris Ballard mentioned yesterday, he was asked that. He said he's stable and he's working through that. Now, whatever stable means, I don't know. But, it's been 2 or 3 weeks since we've seen him. Because, whenever they post the post game with Shane Steichen, he's there.
Right.
So, and again, I go back 40 years with Jim. I consider him a friend, and you just hope the best for him. And hopefully he'll be back running the team normally very briefly.
Perhaps we'll see him on Twitter, and he'll let us know that everything is fine, as he is wont to do. All right, before we get into the meat of our show, in which we're going to discuss what Anthony Richardson and Chris Ballard said during their respective news conferences yesterday, we do want to do a quick rewind of the way the season ended for the Colts with a 23-17 loss to the Houston Texans. It all kind of came down to 4th and 1. That's what a lot of people will think of for this game. Chap, what did you think a little bit of that last play and kind of how the game went for the Colts?
A lot was made and is still made about having – he was a 4th-string running back, Tyler Goodson. It wasn't 30, he was 4th-string running back. it was a perfect play. I mean, that's one, if you draw it up, you're going to say, well, hopefully we'll get this, and you got exactly what you wanted. All it took was the quarterback making a 10-yard throw. And I've seen tougher catches, but you've got a running back sort of moving away and trying to prepare to get the first down, and it's low and behind him. And again, let's keep in mind that I think he may have scored. If he got a better throw, he might have scored. Cut inside Pittman's block, and you don't know. They still would have had to score if they convert the fourth down. Just make it an easier play for your running back. And talking to Rick Venturi, he thinks one of the biggest plays, maybe even bigger than the 4th and 1, was the 75-yard touchdown on their first play.
Set the tone for the rest of that game.
It set the tone, and you're playing catch-up. And, Gus Bradley will be back as coordinator, which rankles a lot of people. And my biggest complaint, yes, he's playing with a secondary that was young and experienced, and that's on Ballard and the personnel people. But when the other team has virtually one player, skill player, that can hurt you, and he goes for 195, 196, that's inexcusable. He had, let's not forget that in the first game he had like 140 yards. So he had like 300 yards, 350 yards in 2 games. That's what bothered me. And there were a ton of receivers that had 120, 140. They've got to get that cleaned up. But for all the anti-Gus Bradley people out there, too bad he's coming back.
Well, and Nico Collins had 74% of C.J. Stroud's yards. In receptions in that game.
You do whatever it takes to not let him be the guy.
And he's the only guy, because they didn't have, at least the last time they played, they had Tank Dell. That guy could get you a little bit, but nobody else on this roster, and the wide receiving core especially, is going to scare you. So you've got to focus on that guy. And I guess maybe some sort of missed communication or some sort of missed assignment back there in the secondary, but you cannot let your rookie cornerback go one-on-one with that guy and give up a 75-yard touchdown, because at that point of the game, the Colts had gone downfield. They'd scored the field goal. Would we have loved a touchdown? Yes, of course we would have, but the crowd was really into it. Like when C.J. Stroud got there and he was calling the play out the line of scrimmage, you could hear through the TV broadcast anyway, that crowd very, very loud. Right. As soon as he throws that ball, everybody sees him running past Juju Brents, nobody back there in secondary for safety help, and then that was dead silence.
And they had to have safety help. I don't know what Nick Cross was doing. They only had one other guy out on the route. I think a tight end was underneath, and they had that covered. I don't know whether that's a result, again, of going with young players. How many times this year did we see touchdowns and the corner or the secondary, they're pointing at each other in the overtime against the Rams with the rookie, Nakua? Holy smokes, he's wide open.
Yep, Kenny Moore, Juju Brents, and they were communicating before that play even happened, and then they were like, we missed
again, they sort of set themselves up for this, and then it certainly didn't help with Isaiah Rodgers' suspension and Juju Brents. One of the things, and we'll get into a little bit with Ballard talking about the secondary, is Juju Brents barely practiced. He misses all the offseason with the wrist. Training camp, he has a hamstring. That bleeds into the season. He starts back. He has this. So it wasn't a lost season by any stretch. But when you're a young player, you need, regardless of what Allen Iverson says, you need to practice. And
it looked like also on the second touchdown from the Texans, there was some miscommunication too, because Rodney Thomas let the fullback run by and went to cover a guy in the flat that was already covered.
I believe that was Rodney Thomas's only defensive snap of the game.
Man, and we've been kind of wondering why he hadn't getting as much playing time as he did last year. Maybe that's why. They kind of wasted an incredible game from JT. 30 carries, 188 yards, 49-yard touchdown run set up by probably the second most impactful pass that Minshew threw in that game. He found Kylie Granson for 23 yards. He made sure not to lead him into the defense. So and then the very next play, JT took it to the house, 6.3 yards per carry. I know a lot of people are like, well, why didn't you just hand it to JT on 4th and 1? And I think the reason is because on 3rd and 2, he barely got a yard because they at that point had kind of gotten stouter.
And
he
was hurt. Remember, he went to the locker room,
yes.
and yes, he came back and had 7 or 8 carries on that drive, but it wasn't the same.
No, it was not.
And was it on second or third down? Second down. where he picked up like 9 yards, maybe it was first down, and he kind of veered out of bounds.
Yes.
If he's more, himself, maybe he plants and gets the first down. So that's one, again, when it doesn't work, do something else. We're talking about the 4th and 1 with the incomplete pass, and let's say they go 4th and 1 and they run JT behind Quentin Nelson, and he gets stuffed, because there have been times this year, in that game, where it didn't happen. Mm-hmm. It didn't work. Then the criticism is, well, I can't believe you ran an injured running back on the most important play. So
do something else. Do something.
When it doesn't work, do something else.
Do something else.
It was a 10-yard pass, for crying out loud. Complete the pass.
I was kind of surprised. It's too bad a little bit that they had to go. They went for that 2-point conversion earlier, and they did the pop pass to Mo Alley Cox, because if they hadn't had to do that earlier in the game, I think that's what we might have seen here, because that play has worked for them a handful of times very, very well this year.
They've always got that list of 4 or 5 plays that, if we get in this situation, 2-point conversion, 4th and 1, we saw that 3 or 4 times this year.
Yes.
They're not gadget plays. They're just plays that if the situation's right. And again, when it doesn't work, do something else. But as Shane Steichen said, and people hate to hear, we got the look we wanted. We got everything we wanted except the completed pass. And what's really crazy, and it sort of drives it home to me, the value of Jonathan Taylor, the 188, and you lose. Remember his 1,800-yard season, which was the greatest season by a Colt running back ever, and you don't make the playoffs.
Missed him. Yep.
You've got to have, no matter, his 188 was the second most yards by a Colt ever in a loss. Marshall Faulk had 192 against Baltimore. But it just shows you that no matter what the running back does and however great he is, the quarterback's got to make 5 or 6 plays or you're not going to win.
And I hate to be cliche, but a team also is kind of what it is sometimes. And with the Colts this year, we saw some situations where, hey, they got a big sack on 2nd down, but it's 3rd and 16, and the other team converts. And we saw that a couple of times on the go-ahead drive from the Texans, where the Colts got him into a 2nd and 20, immediately missed a tackle, gave up a 17-yard pass play, then gave up a 1st down.
They had 3 of those plays on that drive. It was unbelievable.
It drives you nuts. And they had a 1st and 20, and that got erased on a 2nd and 14 by what I thought was a throwaway, but Nico Collins makes this incredible catch on this throw. So, basically what I'm saying is quarterback play, being able to make plays in the passing game. When you can do it, you can win ball games. And when you can't, then you find yourself on the short end of the stick here. And no turnovers for the Colts. Technically, they had one at the very end of the game on the laterals, but
right.
The offense didn't turn the ball over.
And they had been it was 18-2 in their last 20 games with no turnovers. So, and that was always the major blueprint for this Minshew team is don't turn the ball over, and you got you're pretty good. They
got a chance.
They were like 5-0 this year, but and we'll get into it a little bit later or next week about the backup quarterback, and he was the reason that they were in that position to get him to that position. But he just had an awful game, 140 yards passing, and gosh, it was just he wasn't under major duress on that play. Just complete the pass.
And Stroud was I think he doubled or almost doubled his yards per completion in this game, because
right.
It was just when they could. Of course, some of that's the Jonathan Taylor effect, especially in the second half. You're not passing as much, but even sometimes when those plays were there, they just could not quite get to go. Mo dropped 1-2 on what would have been a nice catch. So. We're gonna move past, because there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing you can do about this game. They lost. They're out of the playoffs. 9-8, the final record there, and 3rd in the AFC South, because Jacksonville still has the tiebreaker on them. But we will move ahead.
That's a good thing, though. That means you'll get a 3rd place schedule.
Well, that's true.
One thing people need to keep in mind. It used to be that when you've got the last place schedule, when you got the 1st place schedule, it was more impactful because you played more games based on that. Now you play 3. You'll play 3 games against teams at the same spot in the standings. It matters, but it's not like it used to be. Yeah,
and so, because you've got 6 games against divisional opponents, then 4 games each against the conference, and that leaves those other 3 against the 3rd place teams with the 17-game schedule. So we'll move past the 2023-2024 season. We'll look ahead at 2024. The Colts are already on their way to doing that because one thing they did yesterday is they made Anthony Richardson available for more than 20 minutes yesterday. And, we have talked about the guy before. I tend to call him a kid because he's still so young, and which is dumb because I'm 43, so I'm not exactly, super old. But just the kid, seems to have such a good head on his shoulders. And it was really nice to listen to him yesterday. Talked a little bit about his shoulder injury and his recovery and kind of how he approaches football. What did you take away from him yesterday, Chap?
Yeah, the plan is for him to start throwing in February, which is a good thing because they don't, OTAs, or not OTAs, but the offseason program starts probably early April. So he's on a good timeline. But I'm always struck by, we had, before the season began, we had the 7 or 8 of the core people that cover the team sat down one afternoon and talked, it was like an hour. And you're just struck by the maturity level. Remember, he brought his family with him to town to sort of keep him grounded. Because if you're, at the time he would have been 20. Can you imagine dropping a 20-year-old in a new environment with not a lot of leadership or structure? I mean, holy smokes, things that you can
recipe for disaster.
Oh, what could go wrong?
Yeah, exactly.
Let me give you a list of 10. But I've always been struck by that. And again, he talked about how he considered not having surgery, but then everyone looked at the long-term benefits, and surgery was the right thing. He started 4 games. 173 snaps, not what we anticipated for his rookie year, but that's one of the reasons where Ballard was going back and forth between being discouraged, disappointed, and encouraged. Because last year at this time, he didn't know who his head coach or his quarterback was.
Way different this year.
And now he's got them both. And Ballard, he's pretty smart. He said, he kind of boosts Richardson, but he also not too much. He said, let's not crown him yet. So he also said that about Jacob Eason several years ago. But it's the quarterback. I thought we saw enough of him that he gives you reason to believe. Got to stay healthy, but I'm very struck by just the mental makeup of. He's 21. I mean, how many guys that are 21 are this put together, mentally and grounded? So I'm encouraged.
Yeah, he decided it was in the best interest to have surgery. He kind of consulted the training staff, consulted a few different doctors, his agent, his family, and they all kind of said, you know what, just be best for you to go and get healthy. So he went ahead and did that, got the surgery. And, it'll all be about the shoulder next year, and then a little bit about, are you going to change your playing style a little bit? And I think the takeaway for me is not really, but we are going to try to be a little bit smarter situationally. So if we're in a 1st and 10 situation and all I can get is 4 yards and go out of bounds, I'm going to get the 4 yards and go out of bounds instead of...
Don't burrow and try to get 3 more.
No reason to lower the shoulder to get 3 yards that you can easily pick up on the next play.
And that's what they went through, and Ballard referred to it with Andrew Luck. He said they're very similar in terms of their mental, how they're wired, and this was a career-long internal battle with Andrew Luck, and you could say maybe it contributed to a short career. I don't know. I mean, the supporting cast around him had a lot to do with it as well, the offensive line. But yeah, it's no when to say when, and that's easy to say in a meeting room on a Thursday. And when you get out there in a game, you're just the instinct. That's what Chris Ballard said. He said, Andrew, why did you do that? Well, he said, I guess my instincts took over. But there's got to be a time, and it's a learning curve. We said at the time, and the team for whatever reason didn't agree with us. The concussion, he pulled up. He eased up going into the end zone.
Didn't need to do it.
And he got whacked by the safety, and the whack would have been okay, but then he smacks his head on the ground. And like Ballard said, things you could get away with in college, you can't get away with in the NFL. The players are bigger, they're faster. If he runs through the tape, the safety doesn't hit him in the end zone. They just don't. They've learned you can't do that. And the other injuries were just sort of, I don't say fluky, but they were playing football. We really didn't get a good look of the knee that he banged on the turf. But the shoulder injury that put him out, man, it's just a football play. He's tackling from behind.
It looked like a tackle.
How many times since then, whenever I see a play like that, whether it's a running back or a quarterback, and I'm thinking, boy, that's when Richardson got hurt, and the guy pops up.
Yeah, and he's totally fine.
Right. So it's just bad luck. But it's having said that, there needs to be times when Richardson knows enough is enough. But for people to think they're going to harness what this kid is, they knew exactly what they were drafting. That's why you drafted him. They're not going to turn him into a pocket passer, although Ballard said he was very impressed with his ability to play out of the pocket. But this is who he is, 6'4", 240. And we've seen what a Lamar Jackson can do.
Absolutely.
And you look at that. What would they have done 4th and 1 with Richardson?
That's one of the colleagues here that I work with is from Texas, so he's a Houston fan, and we talked about that, and we were just kind of like, man, I think if it's a 4th and 1 situation, you got Richardson out there, it's just so completely different because you have this almost unlimited bag of tricks that you can pull from with him out there, and then he can bulldoze people in a situation where you need to.
Yeah, and again with Richardson going, or with JT going for 188, that might have been 250 with a quarterback.
Because you've got to account for Richardson as well.
Right, and I'm not comparing Richardson with where Lamar Jackson is. I'm just saying the type of player and the type of threat. You just have to play the Colts differently with Anthony Richardson. And keep in mind that Richardson and Taylor were on the field for one play this year, one play. And so moving forward with Richardson, with JT and with Michael Pittman, adding some pieces around them, that's why there's a bright light ahead.
And keep in mind, I mean, I can't remember the exact statistic, but the Colts were one of the teams that I think they may have used RPOs the most of any team in the league this year. And
with Minshew.
With Minshew. And just imagine how effective some of those, because at times that offense could be very effective, and then other times they were just sort of in this coma and didn't do anything. But just imagine some of those plays with Richardson and that run threat actually being something that you have to worry about.
And that's what, again, 4 games, 4 rushing touchdowns. The franchise record's 5 by a quarterback.
I think he was still 3rd in the team in rushing touchdowns even at the end of the year.
So, again, we've seen, again, what a Jackson, a Jalen Hurts, what those guys do, especially maybe when you get red zone, close to the goal line. What the threat those guys present is unbelievable. It's going to come down to keep him on the field, and that's again, you take precautions as much as you can. I don't know what they work on in the offseason. I mean, physically, drills work on, because it's going to come down to him realize it's his decision, judgment. When do I try to extend the play? When do I say enough's enough? And that's going to be more on Richardson than anything the Colts can do teaching-wise.
Now, one thing he did mention is that the injury, because obviously his right arm, and that's his dominant hand, was immobilized, is that he got a little more comfortable with using his left hand. But you don't think we're going to see any left-handed throwing, do you, Mike?
No, we asked him because he said he was sort of playing around with learning how to, or being better at left-handed. We've seen some left-handed throws by quarterbacks here, and they're not pretty, and they don't.
No.
He even threw one, I think, left-handed during the season, incomplete. But no, he said he could throw maybe 30 yards. Accuracy wouldn't be there. But that's what I like about him. He gives you personality, and, you know, we've had a lot of players, not just quarterbacks, players who have great personality and can't play at the right level. This guy seems to be the entire package. I said early on, I compared his maturity level to Edgerrin James. From their upbringing and how they approach things. If he even remotely approaches Edgerrin James, not on the field, but how he worked, he understood. Like Ballard said, you've got to understand that the fun is in the process. The process during the week gets you to Sunday, so you've got to understand it and embrace the process. Edgerrin James always did that, and I think this kid, 21-year-old, will do as well.
Yeah, well, and so that kind of wraps up our thoughts on Anthony Richardson. Again, good to see him up there, always compelling up on the podium in front of the microphone, and the kid just seems like he's got a good head on his shoulders. And, I mean, sky's the limit as long as he can continue to develop and stay healthy. And I think the Colts couldn't be any happier with their current quarterback situation, not just because they finally have a guy after being on this carousel for several years, but from a financial standpoint, and Ballard mentioned this, and we'll go into it a little bit, is that compared to some of the dead money and some of the big contracts.
Matt Ryan counted $37 million, I believe.
Yeah, I think you're right. And so compared to what they've had to deal with that in the last few years, those big quarterback contracts bringing everything down from a financial standpoint, having to manage those. They've got a guy on a rookie contract right now. They're not paying their backup quarterbacks a ton of money. It does give them some freedom to if they can do it, find a playmaker, get an edge rush, do something impactful in free agency.
Yeah, in 4 years or so, he's going to cost you. You hope.
Exactly.
You hope he's going to cost you $50 million. Who knows what the market? I throw that out there now because that's what it is for those guys now. What's it going to be in 4 years? Holy smokes!
Remember when Luck could sign the richest quarterback contract, and it looks does not compare very favorably to some of the current deals these guys are getting.
So the onus now is on Ballard and his personnel guys to maximize these next, let's say, 3 years of having a very, very affordable, I was going to say cheap, affordable quarterback. That's where you make hay with locking up players, your own players, and selectively, maybe more aggressively in the open market.
And you've got to do it because after that, if you do end up picking your fifth-year option up on the guy, which you want to do, then that's going to be in a new contract, a second contract. It's going to be very expensive, and then
But again, that's a good thing.
It's a good thing, but then your options on adding pieces become a little bit more limited than they would be currently. So we heard from Ballard yesterday. We've seen Chris Ballard be jovial at some of his end-of-the-year press conferences. The last couple of years, not so much.
Not so much.
Yeah, because of the way 2021 ended. Still obviously bitter about that because he actually brought that up yesterday.
9-6, and we're rolling, and there was a disconnect. And he even took it a step further, and he said, a lot of that's on me for the players I brought in. My mind went to one player, but he didn't go quite that specific.
He didn't mention by name, but we'll say the CW on here.
And Dave's not here to defend 27-7, but that's who he was talking about. It was.
Yeah, and unprompted, didn't even need to do it. Mentioned it. That Carson Wentz there, of course, being the implication, and then 2022, obviously miserable year. They fired Frank Reich mid-season. They brought in Jeff Saturday. It turned into kind of a clown show on all methods of measurement for a football team, and so he was not super jovial. But this year, a little bit different. He spoke for like 50 minutes, 55 minutes, something along those lines. He covered a lot of stuff. I've got some bullet points down here. I'll go through a couple of them real quick. He said it was a fun season, even though, right afterwards, obviously very mad, didn't want anybody in the building, didn't want to talk to anybody about it. But upon reflection, once you get a little bit of distance from that, fun season, and that tells me he didn't expect this team maybe to do a whole lot this year. And the way that it did end finally was not great, but the end of the year, getting into the position that they were, kind of a surprise to him and also satisfying.
And that's why you have to look. That's why I say you balance being really disappointed about how close you came to knowing what the future holds. There's so many pieces in place. There's if you had to prioritize right now, you need to help them in the secondary, corner, safety, and I'm not talking about re-signing your own guys. And I think they could use maybe a tight end. They need a receiver. I don't care what they do with Michael Pittman. Pittman's gonna be a Colt next year. He just is. But you still need another. I think you need a number two. You just do. I thought they totally underused Alec Pierce. Now he did. Part of that's on him, but there's 10 or 12 plays when he's running free, and the quarterback doesn't trust himself. So those are the ones that jump out at me, secondary and wide receiver. But there's just a lot of young, encouraging pieces in place, and that's why he was able to look ahead.
And he had a lot of good things to say about his rookies. I mean, I know Juju Brents suffered through some injuries this year and tried to play through it, and then he missed several games because of that. But Jalen Jones, Chris Ballard, very high on that. He was a 7th round pick.
7th round. I thought he struggled, but he was a 7th round pick. And you threw him out there.
Yeah, and he also knows that, they didn't expect Isaiah Rodgers to get suspended. They didn't expect Dallas Flowers to
three or four games into the season.
In this season, lose what is your top. Even he's not that experienced, but he's your top corner.
That's what we semi-joked back then, that it told you the state of the secondary is when you really missed Dallas Flowers.
Yeah, I mean, Darrell Baker was essentially a rookie that you're starting out there. He had struggles, but anyway, he liked what he saw from Jalen Jones. He likes what he saw from Brents. He thinks that, Richardson's got a good future. Daniel Scott, who was a safety for them and tore his ACL in training camp, he said some interesting things about him, about how, that guy, even though he had this bad injury, didn't miss a single practice, and we're really looking forward to getting him healthy next year. Will Mallory as well. He thinks he's developed well and probably developed into one of their best catching tight end.
Sort of Dallas Clark type. I mean, I'm not comparing that at all, but that's the kind of
role.
Right.
Yeah.
And to it, Blake Freeland.
Blake Freeland.
I mean, holy smokes! So many and people are stupid. They really are. Well, he starts playing, and then Braden Smith's going to count $18 million or whatever next year. Well, maybe we can just move on from Braden Smith and we got Blake Freeland. No. Blake Freeland showed you at very least he's going to be a quality swing tackle, backup.
And you'd love to have those guys.
Yes.
You just don't want them starting 17 games.
As a rookie, they threw him out there like they did with Ryman last year. And Bernie played really well. I think Ryman showed you that he is their left tackle of the future. And he's still growing into the position. So I was going to say, the more we do this, I keep saying, this is why Ballard can look ahead and feel pretty good about where they are.
And he was also very happy with the play, and I think fans were too. Offensive line showing a lot of improvement. My goodness, essentially the same unit from last year, and then we did see Freeland play quite a bit, but coaching change there made all the difference in the world.
Pro Football Focus, believe whatever you want to put into it, had him the third-ranked offensive line in the league. As much as the offensive line was to blame for last year's, what do you call it, a clown show?
Yeah, I did. I called it a clown show.
And it was. I thought they were responsible for how well they were this year. Quentin Nelson played top level after struggling last year. Ryman played well. Ryan Kelly, Quentin's a Pro Bowler. Ryan Kelly's
he's an alternate.
Will Fries and both Braden Smith and Freeland. So really a strong group. They should be back next year. I had a nice exchange with Ryan Kelly about returning, and he said, "Where are these speculations coming from that I'm retiring?" And he was sort of agitated. Now, he can change his mind, but bringing these guys back and the influence of Tony Sperano Jr. is amazing. It's amazing. And sometimes you wonder about position coaches. He might have been their biggest addition in the offseason last year.
Because this was a line that we had seen a couple seasons ago just be able to take over games. And then last year, that was just not a thing that they could do.
And they were pretty much healthy last year.
Right.
It wasn't injury-related. It was performance-related. That was the one move they didn't make last year, the position coach, and you wondered why. Of course, now Chris Strausser's in the playoffs with Houston, so I don't know. But offensive line played really well, and if you can build on that next year again, maybe add another interior guy. But this line's pretty well set.
And, he's also Steichen, always dialed in. All ball. I do think that a lot of the Colts, and I know they missed the playoffs. It was only a 9-8 record, but this was a team that was not expected to do much of anything this season. And I think a lot of the credit has to go to Shane Steichen and what we saw just schematically from him, and just the way he's able to kind of motivate his players and connect with his team.
There are always plays in games you criticize for what because that's what the media does. We in the media do. But by and large, there's a dozen plays that we remember, including the 4th and 1. It was schemed up perfect. The Zaire Franklin plays on short yardage, and I thought he was able to maximize Gardner Minshew.
Absolutely, 100%.
We saw Gardner Minshew. This is who he is. And yes, he had those two awful games against, was it Cleveland and the Saints? with 4 turnovers each game.
Yeah, the multi-turnovers.
But by and large, he was one of the primary reasons they got there. And again, I say it again, I put a lot of not going further on him, but that comes with the job. But I thought Steichen did a really good job, considering it was his first year as head coach, where all of a sudden he's not just worried about the offense, preparing the offense. It's everything. He's probably sitting there on a Tuesday preparing for the next game, and somebody says, well, what about this meeting time or whatever? And that was never his issue before. Now he's got the entire team he's got to oversee and direct. I thought he did a magnificent job. And again, the idea of him working with Richardson only as they started moving forward. Remember last year it was until like the second week of training camp. It was now we knew where it was going, but at the same time they were sharing snaps between Richardson and Minshew. Moving forward, it's going to be all Richardson all the time. You're just you're very intrigued by where Steichen and Jim Bob Cooter can take Anthony Richardson.
That's such a good point, Chap, because they did do the most that they could probably do with Minshew this year. At times, very good results from that. Other times, not. But when you think about the athleticism and everything that Anthony Richardson can bring to this offense, you think about maximizing that and just sort of you start here and you grow and you grow and you grow. It is, I hope, to be very immensely satisfying for Colts fans.
Well, go back and look at how the emergence of Jalen Hurts in Philly when Steichen was there. So yeah, it's very encouraging, and again, this roster will come back largely intact as much as it can, but they're going to add 3 or 4 pieces, and in year 2, Steichen can maybe have a louder voice, although I think he had a loud voice this past offseason, but now he can see, we need a strong running, pass-catching running back that they really didn't have. I don't think that's a top strength of Jonathan Taylor or was for Zach Moss. So, boy, wouldn't you love to have Nyheim Hines now?
Man, wouldn't it be nice?
So I think we can look for that kind of a player. But, I think year 2 is really the arrow's certainly up.
We've talked a lot of offense. We talked a little bit about defense, but a lot of Colts fans have been calling for Gus Bradley to, hit the road. And that Steichen says he likes continuity, and Ballard said yesterday he's under contract. I don't expect that Gus is going to be going anywhere.
No, and again, it's funny. I always defer to Rick Venturi, the longtime NFL guy who's very out there with local media. And he said something's got to change. They've got to change their approach. He probably wouldn't mind if the change went deeper than that. But, we need to see better play in the secondary. We need to see a more consistent pass rush, although they had franchise record sacks.
Yeah, and they weren't garbage sacks or anything like that. But we do know that in key moments when they needed to get to the quarterback, it didn't happen sometimes.
Right. So there has to be changes in the way you do things, more man-to-man, whatever. And I totally understand Bradley protecting the young secondary, because I think what he would have said is, if we do more man-to-man, you saw what happened in the first play against Houston. Well, give that guy some help. So, but no, there needs to be some changes. Maybe they need to bring in Rick to offer his advice, which they won't do. But no,
he will give it to them freely,
and he does. I mean, he does on the radio. He goes on the radio. And he gives them what for. And I always defer to Rick when it comes to defense and things, because he's smart and I'm dumb.
He's got a great defensive mind. Coach with some great coaches.
So whether that's something we're going to notice, what they do in training camp or whatever, there has to be a philosophical approach to how they play defense. Since they're not making a change at coordinator.
And then we'll take a more in-depth look at, because we've got content to make and stuff, so we don't want to do it all. But we'll take a more in-depth look at free agency, where it stands for the Colts, because there's a pretty long list of guys. But he did mention a few yesterday. One of them, of course, being Michael Pittman Jr., who I think showed this season how essential he can be to this offense.
Pitts is really an interesting guy, because you want more You want Jamar Chase, you want Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, you want a guy who can just blow by guys.
And to this point, that's not been him. I think he thinks he can be that just from talking to him. He said, it's funny, we talked to him on Monday, I guess it was, and he says he's going to do his he owes it to himself to do the due diligence, and he wants to find a place that's the best fit, and maybe will incorporate the deep ball occasionally with him. I don't think he even sniffs free agency. I just don't. Whether they get him locked up with a long-term deal or the franchise tag, and we can argue it's market-driven. It is. But it's also driven by how they've built this roster. There's no plan B for no Michael Pittman. You
saw what it's like without Michael Pittman.
Atlanta. That was awful. That was, vapor lock when nothing worked.
If you needed Exhibit A for why you should re-sign Michael Pittman Jr., and I know it's just one game, but my goodness, what that offense became when they found out the day before that Pittman was not going to be able to play, what we saw in that game, very scary stuff.
Well, and again, it's just the way they've approached this with Pittman. I don't think he's top 10. I just don't. He was 5th in the league in receptions, but I think he averaged 10.5 or 10.9.
Yeah, it's in the lower part of
right
among receivers anyway.
But that doesn't diminish his value to you, to the team. And this is going to be similar to the Quentin Nelson situation, to where you hit on the draft pick, and when it came time, you had to set the market on a guard, and they paid him what they paid him, an enormous contract. Now, Pittman's in a more premium position, obviously, and I've talked to Rick about this as well, is he's not the kind of guy in Rick's view and in a lot of people's view that you sink $23, $25 million a year in. But if you don't, what? That's why, I tend to think they're going to get the long-term deal done, and we can get into a few of Ballard's comments when he says the market is what the market is, and, this, that, and the other. And he mentioned, maybe you don't want to pay $4 a gallon for gas, but you need gas.
Sometimes you have to,
so
yeah.
You need that for your car. So I think they're prepared. Now, Pittman's got to be reasonable, whatever that reasonable is. If Pitt's coming in here saying I need to get $25 million a year, I don't know. Are the Colts going to give him 4 years, $100 million? I don't know. The franchise tag's 21.7, and it was kind of clear that Ballard doesn't want to use the franchise tag, and he's not worried about any ramifications. With
holding out or not holding out.
Not holding out, but not showing up until I don't know.
Until you have to.
Late August, which is not conducive to growing your quarterback. So the long term, it's funny. We were talking last June in the press room about JT and his situation, and we're throwing, just sign him to 3 years, $42 million, and be done with it. And then that's exactly.
It took him 4 weeks to do, or it took him forever to do it. It felt like.
So I do think they are resigned to the fact, if that's the right phrase, that they're going to overpay for Michael Pittman. If you don't, it's the franchise tag, or failing that, which that'd be crazy to let him go. You're going to overpay for somebody else at the market, whatever the market is, but we don't know what the market is because teams won't let guys get out there. So again, you want more. You want a receiver that brings more. I always compare it to Miles Turner. You want more, but he's pretty good. He's lacking in this, that, and the other. But I think to get a long-term deal done, just because it's their best option. And just from some of the things that Ballard said when he kept saying the market is what the market is, and sort of sometimes you have to follow the market.
And he also said, they have a really good relationship. It's an honest one, sometimes too honest.
It was Pittman, told us that at one point after when he wasn't getting the ball much, he went into Steichen and Chris and said, hey, I need the ball more. And that's when he started getting 10, 12 targets. But he was getting 8 or 10 before that. So, but I do think they have some pretty, I won't say contingent, I'll say heated, because I'll tell you what, everything about Pittman, he knows his business. And some of it's self-serving, but that's fine.
He's an intense dude, man.
Yes, he is. And he is. If you would mark down the top 4 or 5 traits of what Ballard wants in a player, Pittman checks them all. Checks them all
Absolutely.
off. He is that horseshoe guy. But again, when you're right on draft picks, you're going to overpay, which is, again, we talked about with Richardson in 4 years. That's a good thing. It's a problem. No, it's not a problem. It's an issue.
You've got to work around it
right.
from a cap perspective.
Whether it's Quentin Nelson or Braden Smith, Ryan Kelly further back, Shaq Leonard. When you've got those guys, you would much rather overpay for your own. Kenny Moore. I mean, the names keep popping in my head. You'd much rather overpay for your own than overpay for players from other teams, even accomplished players from other teams, because you know your guy.
And they've got, he did mention a few other guys. The Colts do have a long list of free agents. We're not going to go through every single one of them, but we will touch on a couple that Ballard mentioned yesterday. Grover Stewart, he's a big fan of Big Grove, and we've also kind of seen what happens to the defense when he's not in there. Rigoberto Sanchez, the punter, I wouldn't think that would be a hard one. Would be a hard one to keep.
All the controversy when they signed Matt Gay to, was it $4 million, $5 million a year?
Yeah.
In the realm of the roster, that's nothing.
It's peanuts compared to what you're paying.
Get your punter done. He's a top-level punter. Get it done. That's one less thing to worry about in the offseason. You mentioned Kenny Moore. He'll be a free agent. He had a pretty nice year this year compared to last year, where he seemed a little bit lost and despondent in the defense. They used him a little more effectively this year. Tyquan Lewis, great rotational player, one of those guys who can bring it all the time, has had some injuries. The Colts have kind of stuck with him, so we'll see how that goes. Julian Blackmon's another really interesting one, because he emerged as a real playmaker in the defense this year, but unfortunately, he has been a guy who's been riddled with injuries. You hate to say a guy's injury-prone or what have you, but the reality is you can't necessarily count on a full season from Mr. Blackmon. And maybe that's reflected in the contract. Some of these guys probably have more value to the Colts than they do elsewhere. So now whether you try to get these guys with and the Colts have generally been fair with guys. They really have. But it's much better to get a guy done as opposed to letting him go out and see what's out there, and then, hey, if would like to have a chance to match whatever you get. That's always risky. But whenever the GM, he hardly ever talks about contract specifics. He just doesn't. But when he takes 30 seconds, a minute to talk about specific players, and these are all guys he talked about, you put that on your radar.
Put your antennas up
right.
a little bit.
And again, Tyquan Lewis, he might be the most efficient player they've got as far as production and time on the field. And this was for sure, I believe he played in every game or all but one. I think he played in every game. Gardner Minshew, I don't know what to do with him.
It's kind of a tough call. It really is.
We were talking in the media room, again, Nate Atkins with the Star. He thinks and I agree with him, ideally you find a guy more similar to your quarterback, with more run possibilities and as opposed to, I think it's fair to say that Minshew and Richardson aren't similar at all.
No, there's not similar in size, not similar in ability. It's not like Minshew's a smaller version of AR or anything like that.
He's just smaller.
He's just smaller, exactly.
But does Minshew think after what he did this year, he can go somewhere and be a starter? I don't think he's one of the top 32 quarterbacks in the league. I just don't. But if he thinks he can go somewhere where there's a better opportunity, because when he comes back here, he will be number 2.
He will definitely be number 2.
Barring injury, which, again, we saw what...
It could happen again,
right.
Unfortunately.
So, he won't sign. I think it was 1 year, 3.5, and he got $2 million in incentives. I don't think he's going to want to re-sign for $5 million. I just don't. At the same time, Ballard made it very clear that they saw this year the importance of a backup. So they're not going to just have somebody here to hold the clipboard. It's going to be somebody they believe that if it takes 2 or 3 games, this guy can come in and win games which we've not always seen that be the case.
No,
here.
we've had a quarterback who had 2 bad ankles have to play a game because they could not start the guy that they had drafted in the 4th round. Jacob Eason would be the guy, and then he came in and promptly threw an interception. Deer in the headlight looks I will never, ever forget.
It was an awful situation.
Awful situation
it was like
for the
your own
kid.
10 or 15-yard line. But still, you want a guy. Minshew's ideal if you need those 2 or 3 games. Go back to the 2 games that came off the bench.
Yeah, tremendous spot starter.
Houston and Tennessee, great. But then the longer these guys play, so far Joe Flacco's sort of gone against the grain. But
right.
Joshua Dobbs, he
lit the league on fire for a couple weeks.
DeVito, was it Tommy DeVito? Mm-hmm. So at some point, but you need to have a guy, if you believe that, and Ballard said we should legitimately contend for the division every year, in which they've not won since 14, I believe it is,
I think
which
that's
is
right.
ridiculous.
It boggles the mind.
But you need to have a guy that with the Ray Richardson plays, there's probably going to be a game or 2 that he misses just because you need a guy in Minshew-like talents or experience level is what you need, but they may go a different direction just because of his asking price.
Yeah, and if Gardner wants to go and there's a team out there that needs a quality quarterback that can get you through a couple of things.
There's a few of them out there.
You can't do much worse, really, honestly, than what Minshew brought to the Colts this year. All right, and we'll touch on one more thing real quick from Ballard, and then we'll wrap things up here. He did address some of the suspensions that the Colts had this year, and they've had 8 players either suspended
7
or on
suspensions,
on
and then 1
exemption,
and then Drew Ogletree.
yeah. So, and his take on that was basically people make mistakes. It doesn't mean they have bad character.
Yeah, he said there's football character and personal character, and you hope to have great on both. It was really a hard issue for him to comment on.
Yeah, you can't. There's not much you can say, honestly.
No, but what he said is accurate. Is that they did some wrong and they were punished, and we'll see if any of these guys figure into the future. I don't think Drew Ogletree has a future in Indy. They've already cut Tony Brown. Isaiah McKenzie is
he's a
free agent, so you don't do anything with him. So, yeah, and it's just that you can't you kind of cross your fingers. You try to bring in the right type of people, but you can't have the old choir boys at every position. But 7 suspensions, holy smokes! It
just seemed like one after another this season.
Right.
Like as dramatic as last season was, the 2022 season I'm referring to, it seemed like there was something happening with this team every week.
Grover Stewart for 6 games with PEDs, and Muhammad with PEDs, and 2 guys for gambling, and the personal conduct thing with McKenzie and Brown, which we still don't know.
Still got the lid on that.
Nope.
And I said that's one thing too that kind of when things were going bad for the Colts last year, things kind of got out here and there. This team is just clamped down. This organization just clamped down on some of this stuff.
And maybe that's Shane Steichen at the top, Ballard at the top, and then Steichen, and keeping things in house. But there still was accountability.
Right.
There were 2 or 3 players who didn't play well, and they were benched.
Yeah, Darrell Baker was game day inactive for a while.
And at a position they needed
right
help.
where they didn't have a lot of depth. We always talk about that depth versus quality depth, but they're like, well, we're not getting what you need from you, so we're going to just stick Tony Brown out here. Now it didn't work out at all.
We want to see what Tony Brown can do,
but that's
a reason to play a guy.
That's where they were,
right?
In that secondary.
Deion Jackson is their starting running back. Gone. So that's accountability, and Shane Steichen isn't a guy who's going to call out players in his press conferences, but you see the accountability in actions by the team and by the coach.
Yeah. So overall, disappointing start end to the 2023 season. But now, as the NFL does move into the playoffs, you've got these teams that are looking for coaches, not sure what they're going to do at quarterback, and at least for the Colts this year, those are 2 things they do not have to worry about.
Going through coaching searches is just gut-wrenching from a media standpoint. I can imagine what it is. What they interview, like 12 or 15 guys last year.
Yes, it
was
seemed to take
unbelievable.
forever. But they did the right thing, and they
Yes.
wanted to be thorough about it, and they landed on the right guy.
I still say the quarterback is more important than the coach. It just is. We've seen a lot of really good coaches who don't succeed because they've got the wrong. Look at Bill Belichick's career.
Yep.
When he had the right quarterback, pretty good. When he didn't, pretty bad.
Makes all the difference in the world.
So, but they've got both things. They've got right now four. What Jim Irsay always talked about is four pillars, four legs to a chair with the owner, the general manager, and you can argue whether Chris is the right general manager. That's open to debate because of the lack of overall success. Then the head coach and the quarterback. So again, the future fans are impatient, but the future does appear bright.
All right, well, that'll wrap things up for this edition of the Colts Blue Zone Podcast. If you wanted to hear what Anthony Richardson and Chris Ballard had to say, we did post those bonus episodes up on our podcast stream, so you'll find those there. Find us on whatever app you use to listen to podcasts.
We're out there.
We are out there. For Mike Chappell and for Dave Griffiths, again, on the injured list this week, I'm Matt Adams. Thanks for listening.